What's going on, guys? Apathettic here with all your tips, recommendations, and everything in between. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you one of the strongest stasis builds for Warlock that allowed me to power my way to 5500 in comp and defeating some really good teams along the way. So we will cover the weapon loadout we will use, the exotic that pairs best with this build, how to set up your stasis subclass for Warlock, and then tie it all together with armor and stats that will further optimize this build for all-out slaying in the Crucible. So if you're looking to reach 5500 in competitive for those powerful rewards, or just rack up a ton of kills in the Crucible, then you won't want to miss this. The last thing I'll add is I also stream on Twitch, so consider dropping a follow using the link down below if you're looking to watch more gameplay like this live. With that, let's get into it. Starting with our weapons, and for our kinetic slot, we are going to be using one of my favorite hand cannons of all time, Thorn. With Beyond Light, Thorn has recently become a 140 RPM hand cannon and received a nice range buff like all hand cannons. What makes this weapon unique is the burn damage it inflicts when landing your shots, which is helpful in delaying the recovery of your opponents. Thorn's exotic perk, Mark of the Devourer, only makes this more lethal, allowing us to pick up remnants after kills with Thorn, which then increases our burn damage from 1 to 6, but still needing to land 2 crit and 1 bombing to finish higher resilience guardians. So even though Thorn has received a slight nerf to overall damage, the range increase makes Thorn still feel great, and with the exotic we were talking about next, I think a lot of Warlocks are going to main this build in PvP. Moving on to our energy slot, and we are rocking my favorite shotgun, and that's the Fellwinter's Lie. This aggressive frame shotgun is rocking shot package with the perks quick draw and opening shot, making a great defensive and offensive shotgun in the Crucible, and with shot package, it's a little more consistent in the one-shot kill distance compared to other shotguns. If you don't have this shotgun, then I recommend an aggressive frame shotgun and aim for similar perks that are on Fellwinter's Lie. For my heavy slot, I'm running Thermal Erosion, which is the new heavy machine gun that can be obtained by doing the Empire hunts for Varrics, and is a great option to replace other machine guns that have been recently sunset. Getting into our exotic for this build, and that's going to be the new Warlock exotic gauntlets, the Necrotic Grip, with the exotic perk Grasp of the Devourer. Damaging combatants with melee attacks corrupts them with increasing damage over time. Defeating a corrupted combatant spreads the corrupting effect to nearby targets and restores melee energy. Essentially what this exotic does is when meleeing an opponent, you will corrupt them, which does 6 ticks of 5 damage over time, and upon killing a corrupted enemy can spread that same corruption to other nearby targets. When I first used this exotic, I thought it was cool, but it seemed like more of a PvE exotic. That was until I paired this exotic with Thorn. When pairing this exotic with Thorn, it basically gives kills with Thorn a Firefly-like effect that spreads that corruption to other nearby enemies. But the other awesome thing about this exotic is all you have to do is shoot someone with Thorn, and if you kill them while they are burning with any other weapon, they will still release a burst of corruption. The same corruption effect can be caused by the ranged melee on Warlock subclasses, which pairs very well with the new Warlock Stasis melee, which when combined with this ability will do 110 damage on top of freezing your opponent, making this incredible ability even more deadly. The way Thorn and Necrotic Grip pairs together make this combination very devastating in PvP, since you can begin spreading that corruption to enemies who play together in tight group, or when you are in those close range fights with your shotgun. Overall, this exotic is very helpful to take the burn and recovery delaying effects of Thorn to a whole new level. Starting with the subclass, we're going to be using Shadebinder with the super Winter's Wrath, which is the new super that has 2 parts to it, and it's important you combine both to really get the most out of this super. First, you have your basic attack that fires a burst of 4 ice shards that lightly track your opponent, and then when landing, freeze your enemy. Second, you have your AoE burst that does minimal damage to enemies who are not frozen, but will do 650 critical damage when enemies are frozen. This AoE burst also has an insane range and can travel through multiple walls to finish off frozen enemies. The biggest mistake I made when using this super was using the AoE attack like Nova Warp, thinking I had to be close to my frozen enemies to finish them off. Once you freeze an enemy, don't feel the need to get closer to them, but simply follow up with your AoE attack to finish them off. This allows you to stay more mobile in your super and keep pursuing other enemies while simultaneously finishing off your frozen target without needing to look back or backtrack. The last tip I'll give for the super is it can be helpful when firing your shards to anticipate where your enemy will be moving to make you more likely to freeze them with that first burst. Getting into the meat of our subclass, I'm going to give a brief overview starting with our class ability, and for Warlock it's going to be the Healing Rift. Healing Rift does wonders to increase our survivability on Warlock and can also be useful for our teammates in scenarios where both of you are weak. The Healing Rift is especially useful with the introduction of Stasis, since after breaking out from being frozen you're often very low health, and having a rift to help you get your health back as quickly as possible is critical, since enemies will often push you aggressively after freezing you or a teammate. All of this is not to say that an Empowering Rift isn't good, but as you'll see later in this Warlock build, we'll have more than enough damage to output, and Empowering Rift would almost be a waste on this build. Next up, we have the jump for Warlock, and we are going to want to go with Burst Glide. Burst Glide allows us to keep our movement on Warlock as horizontal as possible, and ensures that our character feels less floaty, making us less likely to be shot out of the air. Burst Glide also allows us to move around the map as quickly as possible, since the most effective jump for Warlock skating, which helps not only our neutral game, but our super as well. On to our melee, and on Shadebinder, this is arguably one of the strongest abilities, and it's Penumbral Blast. Sends a blast of stasis forward to freeze your targets. This melee ability is a stasis version of Celestial Fire for Warlock, and has great utility in so many scenarios since it instantly freezes your enemies in one shot. I found that using this ability defensively is often the best play. It can be used against approaching supers, instantly freezing them, then finishing them off. It's also great against shotgun rushers who catch you off guard, allowing you to easily freeze them and putting their push to a dead halt. One way this ability can be used offensively is against more passive opponents who may be playing corners, waiting for the perfect moment. Simply fly across the lane and throw your melee down towards them for an easy freeze. This sets your team up for the easy push, since one of the enemy team is guaranteed to be weak. The strongest part of this ability is the range, and it's something to take advantage of. But be careful, as it can be easy to rely on this ability too much and give up too much of your positioning when using this ability. Lastly, we have our grenade options for our stasis build, and the option to go with here is the Cold Snap Grenade, which is easily the most powerful option for our grenades on stasis. The Cold Snap Grenade is a grenade that freezes on impact, then sends another seeker which can go on to freeze multiple enemies. With this grenade's tracking abilities and the way it can chain to multiple enemies, it can easily set you up for an easy team wipe. It also makes for another great defensive option along with our melee for enemies that are playing more aggressive or pushing with their shotguns. Moving on to our aspects and fragments, and this is where things really start to get interesting for our build. For Warlock, the first aspect you unlock is going to be Ice Flare Bolts. Shattering a frozen target spawns seekers that track and freeze nearby enemies. Think of this aspect like an additional Cold Snap Grenade, where anytime you shatter a frozen enemy, a Cold Snap Grenade spawns from them looking to freeze additional targets. This aspect is insanely powerful and makes freezing multiple enemies at once a common occurrence. Especially when you think about how Warlock has two abilities to instantly freeze your enemies, and you're looking at a lot of opportunities to shatter your opponents and create more seekers to freeze other enemies. This aspect also functions in our super and can help with super's duration, since once we shatter some enemies, they will spawn additional seekers, meaning we have to use less of our burst of stasis to freeze them ourselves. Next, we have our first fragment, and it's the first fragment I recommend unlocking, and it's Whisper of Hedrons. Gain a bonus to weapon damage when freezing a target. Whisper of Hedrons upon freezing a target will give a 25% damage boost to all your weapons for 10 seconds, and this 10-second timer gets reset anytime you freeze an additional target. What this translates to is the damage boost from Whisper of Hedrons and Thorn. You are hitting enemies for 88 damage on headshots and 59 damage on body shots, which is already pretty strong. But the real difference maker is when we get the Soul Devour activated in combination with the damage boost from Whisper of Hedrons. This boosts our Thorn's burn damage up from 4 ticks of 6 damage to 4 ticks of 8, allowing us to get 1 headshot and 1 body shot with Thorn to secure a kill on Guardians of any resilience. This is easily one of the most powerful fragments for stasis, and it really takes Thorn's lethality to a whole different level. The second fragment I'm using is the Whisper of Fissures, which increases the size and burst of stasis when we defeat a frozen enemy or destroy a stasis crystal, and this fragment is nice for that extra bit of damage when you're shattering frozen enemies. It helps make the enemies around those frozen targets a little bit weaker and better sets us up for those crispy Thorn 2-taps. Now that we've discussed our weapon loadout, exotics, and how to set up our subclass, we need to talk about how to make this build effective as possible. The best way to start up your engagements using this build is either by using your melee ability or grenade to get that initial freeze. Getting that initial freeze immediately triggers the 25% damage boost from Whisper of Hedrons and spawns that additional seeker, meaning you could potentially freeze a second enemy. Once that's triggered, you want to try and finish that frozen enemy with Thorn, since that will be what spawns the remnants and gets that exotic perk activated. And if an enemy is near that frozen enemy, they will become corrupted and start taking that burn damage. Now that we've got Soul Devour and our damage boost ability procced, it's time to start going to town with your Thorn. But remember, do also utilize your shotgun, which also have the damage buff, and if your enemy is burning with your Thorn, a kill with a shotgun still spawns the corruption. This build allows you to obliterate entire teams by yourself with the ability to freeze enemies so easily, proc your exotic perk, and take advantage of Necrotic Grip in combination with a damage boosted Thorn. This Warlock Stasis build caters to a more aggressive playstyle, and by leaning into your freezing abilities and leaning into the burning effects of Thorn and Necrotic Grip, you'll be cruising to 5,500 comp points in no time. For my stats and armor that I run for this build, starting with my helmet, I run a recovery mod with double hand cannon targeting to help improve my ADS speed, aim assist, and accuracy of my thorn shot to help make sure it's as lethal as possible. I also throw on taking charge mod, which allows me to come charge with light when I pick up orbs for my teammates, which ties into another mod we'll talk about in a second. Moving on to my gauntlets, and I'm using discipline mod to help get back my cold snap grenade as quick as possible, and with a hand cannon loader and a shotgun dexterity mod to help switch and stow my shotty just a little faster. For my chest piece, I'm rocking another discipline mod with double and flinching hand cannon to reduce the incoming flinch of my character as much as possible. Especially with so many people using ace of spades, I find using double and flinching very helpful. I also added high energy fire, which increases my weapon damage for those charges of light, which is meant to be the icing on the cake with all the other damage boosting perks I'm already using. But if you don't have these charge with light mods, they are by no means necessary for the success of this build. For my boots, I'm using a recovery mod with a shotgun scavenger perk to make sure I get as much shotty ammo as possible upon pickup to ensure I don't run out of special ammo. And for my class item, I'm using another recovery mod with radiant light and outreach to help me get my melee ability back faster. And with radiant light, I get a nice plus 20 to my melee stats, which reduces the melee cooldown even further and cancels out the minus 10 melee impact from Whisper of Hedrons. Overall, for my stats, I always start with 100 recovery, then I try to balance my stats out from there, focusing on my intellect, discipline, and strength. Once I masterwork my boots, I'll have 5 discipline, which is a good level for these stasis subclasses, and with tier 6 strength, I get my melee back every 50 seconds, which allows me to freeze enemies as much as possible and get that damage boost from Whisper of Hedrons. In the future, I may invest more into discipline or strength, but as always, focus on the stats to support your style of play the best. And if you're looking for a more in-depth view of the Shadebinder subclass or still aren't sure which fragment to get first in Beyond Light, check out the videos on the screen so you can get the most out of this powerful new subclass. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.